few things that you can, show us or tell us about that little wonder machine?
Yeah. So again, I'm going to take it out, right? So this is a little 3D printed thing.
Okay.
So let me just take it out so I can show you this.
Yeah, no, that's cool.
guts.
Yeah.
Hopefully not breaking anything. Yeah. So basically, again, this I think my interest in the MiSTer was really stems from, again, this whole sort of look back into retro gaming and things like this, because um Amiga emulation, and I'd be like, oh yeah, I want to play some old game, let's say I want to play Cannon Fodder, but not like the PC version of Cannon Fodder. I want to play the Amiga version for some reason, because oh no, actually, okay, best one I can give you an example of Moonstone. So yeah,
Okay.
let's say I want to play Moonstone, and yeah, you dig out the discs with your old kickstarts on them and things. And it would always feel, and again, this is mostly because I think trying to cutting corners, it would always feel like a faff. It would always feel like, you take ages to get things set up correctly.
Yep.
Certain games crash if you haven't got the profile set up in the right way, and you don't really know why. And some games work if they've got weird glitches in them, and you don't remember those glitches being there. This kind of thing. And so I was like looking at this, thinking, well, I really like the Amiga, but every single time I set myself up with an emulator, I either get bored after a certain amount of time, or basically I can't get it out. This is as far as I've got.
Hey.
So I either get bored, or something comes in and it doesn't feel permanent, is really what I'm getting at. It doesn't feel like, oh, if I pick this up in another 6 months time, I'm going to know what I've got, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
So I might need some pliers. Yeah, this was my worry with this case. It fits a bit too tight. I made this case and a friend of mine 3D printed it for me. And basically it's like, because it's plastic, it's just kind of it's become a single piece.
Shrank in the wash.
Oh no, it's not. I'm being silly. Yeah, I'm just sorry, everybody. I'm just.
You found an extra screw under the feet. Under the feet, yeah.
Yes, that's indeed the problem.
It's all on video. That is, it's all on video.
Yeah. No, here we go. Such a professional. Oh wait. Yeah. So it would never feel permanent. It would always feel like, oh, these disk images are just whatever, and they get deleted, or I just lose track of where I am, and that's just I start again, and then the process restarts. And so I always thought, and it's the same thing for the Spectrum emulation and everything else. And I just sort of came to a conclusion. Yeah, it's emulation. It's not got that sense of permanence. It's not got that sense of like what it feels like on the actual hardware. It's like you mentioned. Yeah, it's like you were mentioning about like the difference between like physical media versus like digital. And I think it's probably a generational thing, but for me, that's what it is. It's like I don't have the hardware anymore. I wish I did for a lot of these machines. I think I've still got my Amiga, but it's my parents' house and it's got a broken keyboard. So and so yeah. So when I was like, and everybody would say, "Oh, Mark, just RetroPie, get RetroPie." And I think that's the solution for many people, because you've got the setup, it does one thing, it's all there, and it works.
Yeah.
But then I stumbled across the MiSTer, and one thing I actually liked about some of the emulation was the fact that you could be like, oh, I'm gonna emulate a computer which I never owned. I'm gonna emulate like an A1200 or an A3000 or whatever, and play a game in a way which was supposed to be played, as opposed to playing a game with this like 5 frames a second kind of slugfest. Um, yeah, and that's where I came across the MiSTer, because basically I found an article and I read this whole thing about that you can run an Amiga 1200 using the Mini MIG core, and it runs about 7 or 8 times faster than an actual A1200, and and this is like a screen grab of like a game on it, and it's like silky smooth, and I'm sort of thinking to myself like, oh my god, I need this.
Sold.
Yeah, and it took me a little while to really fork out the money, because I was like, well, it's a bit of an investment. It is a bit of a premium. I would say it is a bit of a premium retro gaming thing versus a RetroPie. Not that it makes it better. So people should not be like hating on this, saying, "Oh my god, how dare you!" But it is a little bit of a premium solution. But ultimately, I think what it does very, very well.
Good luck.
And so, okay,
Hey,
finally,
there it is.
finally.
Okay.
Oh my god! So what it is in the board in the middle.
Yeah.
That's a FPGA board. It's a
Okay.
DE10 Nano, which is basically a board made for education. So it's supposed to be like a beginner sort of FPGA board. It's got a bunch of GPIO on it and things like this.
Okay.
And it was born, as far as I'm aware, out of another project, the MiST project, which was kind of an extension of the MiniMig project. It's like there's families of projects where basically developers were like, "Oh, we want to recreate the chipset of an Amiga for an FPGA." So at some point in the future, this is true for many machines. No, these chips are not going to be made anymore. And so what do you do to preserve hardware which is going to eventually die? It's like, well, one way you can do it is you write it for an FPGA. You can recreate the transistor level operations in an FPGA. And that's exactly what they've done for so many systems. And they've got it all packaged into this little thing, the MiSTer. So this has got a third-party I/O board on the top, which has got like a VGA out.
Yeah.
VGA out and a sound jack. Then on the side you see a whole bunch of USB stuff. Is a USB shield on the bottom. It's not the fastest USB shield, but it is pretty good. When I say that, I think the important difference between like Raspberry Pi and the MiSTer is latency. The latency, like between button press and action, is probably as close to real hardware that you can possibly get wherever there is a USB interface involved.
Wow.
If that makes any sense. So the USB interface here goes straight to the FPGA. It does have some interpretation. There's like a Linux. There's actually a Linux distribution which runs on this as well at the same time. It's kind of in the background, but it's probably as fast as you can get.
Yeah.
Without it being emulated. And yeah, I mostly got it for the Amiga, and it's stunning. And where I started then to understand why my frustration with emulation for the Amiga was, and where it was the fact that the emulators will let you make a system which never existed.
Yeah.
And that's where things start to get a bit weird. And what I mean by that is I actually discovered this because of playing with the MiSTer. So the MiniMig core basically will simulate the 68K, and it'll also do the 68K20, which was in the A1200. So basically, that gives you an A1200 or an A500 style system from this beast. But it's the system as with the chipset. And what I mean by that is if you try and tell an A500 that it has a hard drive, it won't know what the hell you're talking about, and it will crash.
Okay.
And it will go straight to the I can't really call it now, the little red line.
Oh, the meditation, the guru meditation.
Guru, yeah. It will literally boot up and be like, this system is trying to do something. I don't know what the hell you're doing.
Right. Okay.
And then that's when you start to read, and I'm reading around. I'm like, oh, I'd really like to have like an A500 like 68K system with a hard drive image, so I can put a whole bunch of stuff on there. And then it comes true that, yeah, the only system which was based on the 68K, which had a capability of having a hard drive, was the A600, the A600 HD. and it was a very specific version of the kickstart, the BIOS, which supported it. And lo and behold, you set up an A500 style system for 68K. It only works with a hard drive with that BIOS. I know that was very boring and technical, but it was at that point where I'm like, oh my god, this is why when I'm emulating anything and I need a A500, everything goes off the wall crazy, because the emulators will let you do it, but you shouldn't really do it. And that's why you get all the CPU exceptions, you get loads of crashing, you get tons of like weird glitching, because the machine is being faked in a non-physical way.
Yeah, no, I
Whereas
understand
this,
that. Yeah,
whereas this is creating the actual hardware, like, and the CPU timings are exact. You know, the kind of glitches you get on a real real hardware, you get exactly the same glitches here. I think the most impressive thing is the USB though, because it's so seamless. So the way the MiSTer works is it's all everything's on a little flash card, and you start the system up, and it just boots straight into like a menu, and if you plug a new controller in it and press the button, it will instantly create like a profile for that controller. It remembers the controller.
okay.
And so you then go off and you define your keys. You define the button presses for the the MiSTer itself.
Now, is this per system?
Well, you can do it global and per system.
Okay.
But it remembers. It remembers. So you don't have to have this problem where you're like, oh, plug it in. Oh, I've got to redefine.
So it just saves a profile on the SD card.
Yep. Yeah. Okay. It's just all seamless and all automatic. So, and again, it seems to know the difference between. Obviously, it seems to know the difference between like a keyboard, mouse, and a controller.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's just so well done. And the fun part, which was I played around with recently, was there is a new core. There's a PlayStation core, the PSX core, and it's still sort of in alpha, beta kind of development level. But even though it's in alpha or beta, I was expecting so many things to be broken, it not work correctly. This guy, complete genius. Like he basically, he basically created what was about 80% of what a PlayStation is, and it still works. It actually will play games. What I was going to say, one of the impressive ones, I'm not sure, I think you saw it, was the Quake, a video I recorded.
Yeah.
So what the interesting thing there is that's playing controller mouse. And yeah, that was actually one of those things I thought was super impressive, because it's like...
So you're playing the PlayStation version of Quake, but it's picking up the keyboard and mouse?
Well, no. So at the time, it was I was using a controller and a mouse. So the PlayStation you could get a mouse for.
Yes,
but then
I do vaguely remember that. Yeah, the PlayStation.
Yeah, mouse, and so it was kind of cool. It was like, oh, I can just define my controller as a mouse. And I was thinking to myself, well, how do I tell it it's that mouse rather than some mouse I've plugged in? It knows. It just automatically knows. It's like, this is a mouse. You're going to use this. What are you talking about?
That's helpful.
And then I was just using the controller. Now, what is interesting is the same thing as you just said. What is interesting is that you can define per core hotkeys. So you can make a keyboard. You can fake a controller using the keyboard. And so you could technically do keyboard and mouse as well. It's just stunning. It's a wonderful device. I have mostly spent time doing the PlayStation, obviously, the Amiga, spectrums of all types, I guess, and the C64 mostly. A few game consoles here and there, but mostly both systems.
So this here is the MiSTer. I'm not going to completely take it apart, but basically the FPGA board in the middle of it is where the brains are, and it's based on a D10 Nano board by Teresic. I probably just butchered that name. On this board alone, it has HDMI output. That's one thing I didn't speak about very much, but the HDMI output is quite nice. The MiSTer will auto upscale to whatever display resolution you want, and it's crisp. It's absolutely beautiful. And it just gets powered by a 5 volts jack there. On this side, this thing you can see says this face outwards is a memory expansion plugged into one of the GPIOs. This is used for quite a few of the cores, and largely, as I say, to do with memory speed. And the little module here that you can see, which is an extra, you can sort of see it on this side, you can sort of see it on this side as well. That's a real-time clock, so that's used by some of the cores to obviously set the time. So if the Amiga, for example, uses this, and yeah, if it's available, it just works, which is actually one of the features which I really like about the MiSTer in general. Things just work. There are a few teething problems you can face, but you know, for most purposes, it just works. This rather sketchy looking thing here is just a USB bridge which goes to the USB ports here. There is power on one side. Oh dear. There is power on one side, and basically the rest of them are usable USB ports. What else is on here? Yeah, so the hat that you can see on the top here is the analog I/O, and again it interfaces via some GPIO there. And here basically there is a fan, although it's kind of optional. The MiSTer itself, or I should say the FPGA board itself, is rated to be used without any cooling. So yeah, it'll get hot, but it's apparently fine. I've never had any problems with it, but I've got the fan on it anyway. So the analog I/O basically gives you a couple of these buttons here. So it's like a reset, soft reset, hard reset, menus, and some user button, which are used for various things. If you don't have a keyboard, for example, connected to it. The VGA output, yeah, the VGA output is, you know, as you might see, lots of people can use these to drive old CRT displays if they're recreating arcade cabinets, which is quite cool. The other thing which is quite good on this is arcade cores. People are actually working on arcade machines, essentially the hardware for arcade machines recreated in the FPGA. So that's also super nice. Yeah, now this little USB is not actually USB. This is actually like an extra user peripheral. So for example, you can get a small dongle to basically convert an NES controller, for example, or some other controller straight to this essentially interface. And yes, it can use the original hardware. That's about it, really. Yeah, everything goes onto your SD card, which sits just there. There is another SD card slot on the top, and this is for certain cores which can directly interface with an SD card. Yeah, it's a beautiful little bit of kit.
Yeah, because you recommended it, looking in the Next, and actually that's largely how I went down this FPGA train, because I was looking at getting a Next because I wanted to really revive my old Spectrum, see if my parents could find it in the loft and send it me, and then I kept seeing you post things up about the Next, and I was like, oh, Next sounds so cool.
Oh, it really is.
and then I was looking into it, and it's like, oh, it's an FPGA. Okay, cool. And I was then thinking, given it's an FPGA, it could probably run other stuff, and it can, as an unofficial capacity, it can run other systems as well. And then that's where it was like, then for some reason it was like FPGA project, MiSTer. So yeah, I mean, I've played around a little bit with the Next core, but not very much. Mostly just like a hello world. Oh, okay, it boots. Things work. I can play a couple of games.
I haven't looked at the the MiSTer version of the next. I don't know if is it the exact core, or is it just somebody else is working on it, or
I think it's basically a ported core. So the way I understand a lot of this is that there is a few things which make programming for the MiSTer specific to this type of FPGA, but it's not much. Okay. It's like a few little bits here and there, and so there's like minimal changes which need to be made. So basically, again, I have not done any FPGA programming, so I'm I'm not an authority on any of this.
Yeah.
But there's like 2 or 3 programming languages which are fairly standard, Verilog and VHDL, which so if you can get something working on a MiSTer FPGA, you can technically get it working on most FPGAs with some work. And most of the stuff which is going along with this is an example. So the FPGA board talks to this I/O hat.
So can you buy that on its own, that middle part?
Yeah.
But
yeah, I bought it on,
what can you run with just that middle part?
With just the middle part, any core which doesn't require you to have external memory, and that runs. I think there's about 5 or 6, maybe 7 cores which you can run without this external RAM slot.
Right. Okay.
So, and the reason why that's there is because some systems, for timing, some systems don't like to use the onboard RAM. So I think there's like 2 gigabytes of RAM, and it's too fast. It's like apparently way too fast, and it's a pain in the ass for some of these old systems to interface with.
Yeah.
And so they opted for this RAM slot, which is basically just an SD. It's just like an SD RAM chip on it, and that enables all cores. But like the one which I played, I think while I was waiting for the rest of this kit to turn up, was like the Sega Genesis, so like Master System. That runs without it.
So all that's on there as well.
Yeah, it runs without it. You can also run 486. There's a AO 486 core, which I think is amazing because you can run.
Get Doom on there.
You can run if you want a slow ass 486 with a USB interface, which is like completely bizarre because it didn't exist back then. You can